Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a Undercolor of Law analysis of the Signalgate hearings. Now, they weren't really Signalgate hearings, and as you probably all know, Signalgate's a reference to the Watergate controversy. Pretty much you can attach the word gate to any controversy or scandal in D.C. The Watergate hearings were actually hearings specifically about Watergate. This one turned out to be all about this signal scandal where the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Security, the Vice President, the Secretary of State were all on a signal chat room talking about these plans to strike the Houthi rebels with airplane bombings and missile strikes. Now, the reason there were hearings on this today was, I think Rachel Maddow put it best when she said it's because God keeps a day book, or maybe a date book. I didn't quite catch that. Meaning these had previously been scheduled for hearings on what they call the worldwide threat. That's an assessment where the intelligence community reports to Congress, like in the movies, for Congress's oversight. These are the threats that are presented to national security worldwide. This is what we're talking about. However, today it really focused just on this one issue. Probably what they had hoped to do was, as always, to focus on their favorite Trojan horse, immigration. Instead, it was all about the Signalgate issue. So, we already discussed previously the overall outline to break down what was happening in that conversation, what the problems were, what is signal, and what the potential liabilities could be. But the hearings today really gave us a good insight into what is the mindset of the Trump administration in dealing with the fact that this has been discovered. Remember, it was discovered because this was improper to be doing this type of planning on a non-secure government channel, but the only reason we know about it is because they conveniently included in their chat the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, a journalist. How that happened, we don't know yet. So, in looking at some of the issues that came up, first I want to point out there's this enormously valuable resource that Just Security did. We'll put up the link for you. And it pretty much goes over what we talked about the other night, but in particular it focuses on the Espionage Act, the gross negligence in mishandling national defense information. And as we've discussed before, it's somebody who's been entrusted with having possession of information relating to national defense through gross negligence permits that to be removed from its proper place of custody, delivered to someone in violation of it, stolen, abstracted, or destroyed. That's important. Potential 10-year imprisonment for that. Now, what this analysis points out, though, is that this certainly seems like gross negligence, right? But it's not that easy to prove it. It's not as the common sense terms of that was grossly negligent. In fact, as part of the Hillary Clinton investigation, the DOJ Inspector General looked at the Hillary Clinton investigation. She was, remember, keeping a private email server, and there was some classified information and use of that when she was Secretary of State. Ultimately, after the FBI looked at that, DOJ looked at it, and they declined to prosecute under the standard of the gross negligence. And the DOJ Inspector General, reviewing that investigation, said this makes sense because the standard for the gross negligence is very, very high. As they characterized it, it would be such gross negligence as to almost suggest deliberate intention, something just short of being willful. Intention, willful, very lawyerly discussion. But the point is, it's a lot to prove. It can't just be, wow, you did a really sloppy job. It's got to be something very, very high to show that level of gross negligence. What's an example of that? Well, there's a former CIA director, John Deutsch, who used his home computer to store classified information. The Clinton Justice Department, under Attorney General Reno, my former boss, had looked at it and was going to decline to prosecute, but there was a lot of pressure from Congress at that time, and so a special prosecutor was appointed to look at that issue. That special prosecutor recommended an indictment, and the former CIA director was ready to plead guilty, not to the highest felony, but to unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents, but he was saved at the bell. because on his last day in office, President Clinton pardoned him. So got out from under having to have that conviction. But that would be an example of high-level people, the head of the CIA, having criminal liability over the way they handled information. So at the hearing, let's take a quick listen to Tulsi Gabbard trying to navigate some of these potential concerns. Take a quick listen, we'll talk to you on the other side.
Did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not. Are you denying? Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat.
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat.
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security Council.
Because it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
Now, to get a full sense here of what's happening, you have to understand what is Tulsi Gabbard's title, what's her office, right? She's director of ONI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI actually. Now, the intelligence community and government people love to have acronyms to sound like, we're real insiders, and the point of the ODNI is it dates back actually to 1955. There's this idea that the CIA should operationally get run by a deputy director so that the director could really focus on kind of macro, big picture issues of coordinating intelligence, worldwide threats, etc. This idea did not really come to pass until post 9/11, when there was a feeling that there had been a failure of coordination and intelligence. And so they created the ODNI to coordinate this. The director, Tulsi Gabbard, is a cabinet level position who advises the president directly on this. So I'm going to play you another part of her clip here when she's being questioned.
Senator, I was on a signal messaging group.
So you were the John Ratcliffe on that chat?
I was.
Thank you.
So she won't even admit to being part of the signal chat, right? She's questioned Mark Warner saying, aren't you the TG, her initials on it? And she's like, I can't comment on any details here because it's being reviewed by the National Security Council. Okay, fine, that's a position she can take. However, the next witness who's up with her, who is the director of the CIA, freely admits to being in the chat. So it seems like a little bit of a disconnect with her saying, I can't comment on any details, but the director of the CIA says, yeah, I was on the chat. So what actually is their position on this? Are they saying we can't talk about details because it's being reviewed, or they just don't have their act together? You decide on that one. So if we focus next on Ratcliffe, the CIA director's testimony, he really wants to get into his use of the signal chat. There's a big confrontation with him and Warner, where Warner's trying to get to his questions. But Ratcliffe really wants to talk about why it's okay for him to be using Signal. And it's an important point because it shows he's no dummy about the potential legal exposure. Take a listen.
It is
I've got a series
end-to-end encryption. So to finish,
I understand encryption.
It is permissible to use to communicate and coordinate for work purposes, provided, Senator, that any decisions that are made are also recorded through formal channels. Right. So
now this is significant because he recognizes the issue about federal records, which we also discussed the previous night. Remember the idea that if you use Signal, it's not a federal record. You haven't created a federal record. So it doesn't exist. There's zero transparency. You can do what you want and nobody's ever going to know about it unless you include a journalist in the chat. And by the way, as has been reported, the journalist exercised great discretion, acted very responsibly. When he realized that there was very sensitive information being put out there, he didn't publish that. In fact, he left the chat. They didn't seem to notice he left the chat either. But notice what Ratcliffe is focusing on, right? He says, there's nothing wrong with using Signal. In fact, they give it to us to use so long as there is formal record keeping of what's happened. And he makes a really big deal out of that, saying his staff would have done that here. Now, I don't know what he really means by that. Did they record the Signal chat, or are they just making a different notation? That to them will be the formal record. But it tells us he's very clear that he wants to avoid the hot water of possibly destroying and disposing of government property, because here's the problem, right? If the Signal chat is treated as a government record, it gets deleted, right? Signal lets stuff get deleted. So now you've created a government record and you're also destroying the government record. So then you've got destruction of government records. There's another one, which is depredation of it, mutilating it. All these things he's very much aware of. Let's just play this one snippet again so you can see how much he is aware about that. Yeah, he really wants to get in there, the fact that his staff still recorded through formal channels. How they did that contemporaneously afterwards, we don't know. But he really wants to get that point in because he clearly thinks he has a defense here and he wants to get out there early so he can avoid any hot water later. Now, just to add some color to this here, you probably heard this reported, CBS News reported that during this chat, one of the participants, Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, was actually in Moscow at the time he was added to the Signal group. All right, so just because he's in Moscow doesn't mean that Signal's somehow less secure, but hey, it seems like they ought to be aware of the fact that one of their participants is actually in Russia while they're doing the Signal chat. And it's not like Russian intelligence is unaware of Signal communications and won't be working on trying to hack it. All right, so what should happen next? Of course, Congress needs to hold hearings, like they're sort of already doing. One weapon that they can use here, given the way that Tulsi Gabbard is trying to stonewall them on this point, and if others try to stonewall them, is they can subpoena custodians of records. Now, usually you don't subpoena the custodian of records because everyone says, yeah, this really is the record, this was the chain of custody. But if you got someone stonewalling you, and this is one of the techniques we're going to look at later more in depth about particular tactics and weapons that the Democrats could try to use, even though they're a minority in Congress, you can make the custodian records come forth and testify. So you've got the CIA director saying there's a formal record, right? Put the custodian on and say, okay, what was the formal record? Let's see it. This is something that can be used a lot more in the future when you have witnesses who don't want to say anything. Let's talk about the documents. Let's get the documents out there. Make them fight over the actual disclosure of the documents rather than the testimony of the principal person, somebody like Tulsi Gabbard. Here's another thing. I was reminded about what happened back with the former director of the CIA, where the congressional pressure caused the special counsel to be appointed. Now, maybe enough congressional pressure might push the Attorney General Bondi to appoint a special counsel, not to prosecute. I remain firmly convinced DOJ will never prosecute anybody for this. But easy enough to appoint a special counsel, spend a bunch of time investigating it with the idea that, it'll get buried, they'll find nothing wrong. Unless, of course, the Republicans would actually appoint a real special counsel to look at it, like the Democrats seem to always want to appoint a conservative Republican to look at their issues, Lord knows why. If they did that, they might have a problem. Let's assume they appoint someone just to whitewash it. There's zero chance DOJ is going to prosecute it, but any competent investigator is going to get a lot of information. There will be testimony, there'll be reports, and that is generally a good thing. Now, we've seen that the special counsel can cover up things, right? Or the report can be buried. So even if they do that, while that is an important thing to do, maybe it makes a record for future DOJ people, maybe, but it's something that the Republican leadership has to deal with. It's going to slow down one more distraction from all the things they want to do. They have to deal with that. And these are, vice presidents got to testify, the Secretary of State's got to testify. I mean, this could be a hassle for them and distract them. But what really needs to happen is the congressional hearings. That's really the best way to force it into the sunlight. And most importantly, it's the best way for Congress to reassert their position, take back their power as a functioning branch of government. So let's keep our eye on that. Look forward to them doing more of these Signalgate hearings. All right, that's it for now. Keep the replies and comments coming. Always a pleasure to read them, and we will be talking to you soon.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.